The American poet Robert Frost once wrote in his poem titled "The Road Not Taken," "Two roads diverged in the yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both, and be one traveler long as I stood, and look down one as far as I could, to where it bent in the undergrowth." I shall be telling this with a sigh. Two roads diverged in the wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. There's been a long-standing debate between nature versus nurture, and for me, I tend to see it as a struggle between both our physical environments and the ways that we are raised in those environments. Whether it's the places we grow up or the people that surround us, we're influenced by both. However, it's important to recognize how both nature and nurture affect us in our daily lives, and whether one has more significance than the other. My story starts in the place where I call home. Being born and raised in Saudi Arabia for my entire life, I grew up in a small yet diverse community where you went to class with the same kids you'd always grown up with, and where summers were spent by the poolside, escaping the sweltering heat, and where every weekend, cars would line the streets as hundreds of Muslims went to pray at their local mosques. In addition, being next door to various countries, my parents opened my eyes to the unique traditions and lifestyles of a world previously unknown to me. It was a life that I never expected, but a life that I was nonetheless eternally grateful for. However, living in Saudi, religion had a strict presence in everyday life. I can remember the many times my mother, before walking out of the compound, had to put on her black abaya and had to take a taxi when my dad couldn't drive her, not because she couldn't drive, no, but because she didn't even have the right to. And I remember sitting in the back of those taxis, looking up at her wide-eyed and wondering, why can Dad drive, but you can't? It was a simple question, but there was never really a simple answer. Saudi was a nation in which men dominated and where discrimination against women was very, very prevalent. However, while there were many problems within Saudi, similar to any other country, my experiences growing up there were unique and unlike any other. For one, the names of the students I went to school with ranged from Madhavan, Ahmed, Fatima, to Rizwan and Yahya. It was a microcosm of the world, and where the intersection of cultures and identities impacted everyday life. And there I was, in the middle of it all. This was the environment in which I grew up in, and one that I learned a lot from since. All of the unique experiences that I was fortunate enough to have helped shape the person I am today, giving me a certain perspective and understanding of the world around me. However, knowing how my life was affected by living in Saudi, I often wondered how the experiences of my parents growing up in their own environments affected their lives, and how it eventually led them to move to Saudi. My father grew up in an abusive household, and so did my grandfather and his father before him. My grandpa was raised in Louisiana in the 1940s and 50s in a poor, dysfunctional family. Without any examples of good parenting, he was taught to use physical force to cope and control the world around him. However, in an attempt to escape his environment, he left Louisiana and moved to Colorado alongside my grandma, separating himself from his relatives and starting a new, better life. While the move allowed him to experience the freedom to change, he still brought with him his experiences and the ways in which he brought his children up. Because of this, my father, my uncle, and my aunt each grew up in a household that was full of abuse. And they were each forced with a decision whether to choose a path of healing or to continue the cycle of abuse. It was a hike up to Pikes Peak with my uncle when I finally decided to ask him about his childhood and how he overcame that cycle of abuse. And what he told me was very shocking. As we hiked, He told me that he had never actually overcome his struggle, and in fact dealt with it every day. Even as an adult, his experiences as a child still were ingrained in him so deeply that he would act out and behave aggressively when he couldn't control himself. But he left with me a piece of advice that I will never forget. He said, every time you act out, rather than forgetting it, moving on, think about the reasons behind your behavior and your motivations behind your actions. See, if you never attempt to understand why you did what you did, it's impossible to change. My uncle was able to take a step back and analyze the person he was, viewing how his childhood experiences influenced him, even till today. He was forced with the decision between two paths: the continual cycle of abuse, or to forge his own path of healthy relationships and actions in his life. As I learned more about my father, my uncle, and my grandpa, I began to understand the importance of recognizing our past environments and seeing how they reflect in our daily lives, whether that's our physical environments, like myself growing up in Saudi, or the ways in which we are raised, similar to my father and my uncle. Nevertheless, our environments are susceptible to change, and we can grow, self-analyze, and create greater opportunities by taking advantage of the risks and opportunities out there. In our environments, we are faced with decisions that might alter the course of our lives. And similar to my uncle, my parents had a similar decision to make. They were forced to choose between moving to Saudi or not. And by choosing, it allowed my siblings and I to grow up in a place vastly different from their own environments, teaching us how to understand and culturally accept the world around us, so different from the other places that we visited. The importance of taking that first step towards a changing environment that might push and pull you in unexpected ways can positively affect your lives. As a kid, I loved watching The Lord of the Rings. It was seriously one of my favorite movies, full of magic, wizardry, war, and love. But there was one scene that always stood out to me. And it happened when Frodo Baggins, the main character, and his best friend, Samwise Gamgee, left their home for the first time. And Samwise looks back at Frodo, and he says, "If I take one more step, it will be the farthest away from home I've ever been." And those experiences from viewing that scene made me think about what would have happened if Samwise never took that step. Would he have regretted his decision? Would he have even been the same person as he was at the beginning of the movie? Each of us are faced with similar decisions in our lives, between two paths that we can choose and better ourselves, or continue and worsen our environments around us. We have the power to choose our surroundings, whether that may be the places we live or the people who we spend our time with. These decisions don't have to be as grand and big as moving to another country similar to my parents, but they can still have a drastic impact in our lives. Jim Rohn, an American entrepreneur, once said that you are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. And although this is an exaggeration, it goes to show how even the people we surround ourselves with can influence the way we act and behave and think. They can have such a vital impact in our daily lives, similar to the places we grow up. Now, if I can leave you with one thing from this talk, it's that since we have the power to choose our environments, it's important to understand how our environments affect us in our childhood and the ways we can implement that in our lives. And so when we are forced with these life-altering decisions, we can choose to create a path of healing or a path that's not the same. So I ask you, what path will you choose? Thank you.